All right, so we're going to continue on our April theme here today. And so we began the April theme the last time I was with you all. And the April theme is all about healing from trauma. And so I invited everyone to look at the amazing Unity booklet that came out this month called Healing a Thousand Different Ways. And you can find that on unity.org. There might even be some in the bookstore, some copies. And it's all about thinking through how do we heal? And I have a particular entry in that booklet that is all about healing from trauma. So using that kind of as an inspiration point, thinking through all of the things that are happening in the world in this time and all of the ways in which healing from trauma is so necessary. I shared with you all the last time that, we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country, in this world. It is a health crisis. Myself as a minister, talking to other minister colleagues, I know that there are so many things that are happening now that were not happening before in terms of issues that people are having with depression and anxiety. I talk to, many healthcare practitioners, including my own, like my acupuncture, who is telling me that there's so many, an increase in different kinds of things they're seeing, including, ironically enough, Bell's palsy, which I had no idea that comes from stress. In many ways. And so, kind of really looking at how this is something we need to look at as a people, how we need to look at this as a spiritual community. How is this happening in our own lives and how do we address it? So we started last time with looking at healing collective drama. So anything that is outside of the usual range of human experience that is very distressing is basically trauma. And so then collective is how as a group, we experience something, shared psychological and emotional reaction to some kind of catastrophic event together that people are experiencing in numbers. So something that is out of the ordinary that causes distress. It can be natural disasters or mass shootings or attacks or economic recessions or things like the pandemic. So when I looked at how all of that has impacted our lives and the ways in which we need to recognize maybe that impact in our own lives to be able to first acknowledge it, to recognize it, and then attempt to address it. And so that was the last time that I was with you, that I shared with you all that, and that particular talk is online that you can catch up with. Now, today, we're going to talk about embracing the tigers in our life. And by tigers, I really mean, yes, Tigers, tigers, animal, we're looking at really what it means for me is triggers. So the triggers in our lives, the things that happen on a daily basis that recreate the trauma, that open up that space for us in our own minds and bodies, that take us back there. And back there, sometimes we don't even know what there is, but we know that we're experiencing anxiety or anger or sadness or shame or guilt. And so things that happen in our lives, in the grocery store, in our relationships, in our families, in our church communities, that cause us to have these emotional reactions, these triggers. So we're trying to understand, how do we heal those triggers? And I'm using the symbolism of a tiger for many different reasons. And it actually started as my own journey. I had a dream one evening where I was encountered a tiger. And at the beginning, I was very fearful and I went into sort of a freeze mode. But then something told me to open my eyes and I saw the tiger. And in that moment, as I met the tiger eye to eye, I saw that the tiger's anger, or the tiger itself, as this scary creature, softened. And we began to get into relationship. And to the point where at one moment in the dream, I literally put my hand in the tiger's mouth. And in the dream, I was actually shocked that I could actually do this, and knowing that it was a scary thing and that it was, but I was willing to do it. And in another moment, the tiger really was coming to me almost as if I was its mother and wanting a warm embrace. And so I'm embracing this tiger in a way that is being able to create this relationship and also nurturing it, which is really interesting. So that kind of caused me to wake up and be really curious about what that was about, and started doing my own research about the significance of tigers, and coming to find out tiger as being part of also this imagery, this symbolism as part of a spiritual journey. So let me kind of break this down a little bit for us. So, tigers are the largest wildcats. They can be 11 feet long. They can be up to 670 pounds. They can leap 33 feet in the air, so 33 feet horizontally, to be able to attack their prey or to move. They're also nocturnal creatures. And so that provides an interesting symbolism for us, because triggers are really what we also call part of our shadow self, part of the existence in the shadow, those parts of us that kind of come out in these moments that we may not be proud of, or that may cause us further anguish and distress, or ways in which we have these parts of ourselves. So it's interesting that they're also these nocturnal creatures, and they're also ambush hunters, meaning that they hunt in packs together, and they do it by sneaking up on their prey. And so part of that too is perfect imagery for this idea trigger, because when we're triggered, we don't expect it. It comes up on us, it creeps up on us suddenly, and we find ourselves in this emotional state, in this turmoil, in this fight, flight, or freeze, and we're needing to deal with all of this emotion that's rushing in. And though we have this imagery of the tiger as being something that is like our triggers, overwhelming, it takes us over, it takes us out of ourselves, it takes us off of our God selves. Sometimes we think it takes us off of wanting to be in that Christ consciousness. The tiger is also something really important in our lives. Why? So tigers themselves are revered as humble. They're known to feed the females and cubs first. Asian cultures, tigers are revered. In China and in India, they are known for their strength, their agility, their beauty, their fierceness. In Korean mythology, for example, tigers are known as the guardians that drive away evil spirits and bring good luck. So I want us to kind of, use this imagery as we advance on this topic. When I did the research, I found the book Waking the Tiger by Dr. Stephen Levine, which is what Peter Levine, which I shared with you the last time I was with you. And, that was a book that was so amazing, because that used the tiger imagery to talk exactly about this notion of triggers. In the book, there's this wonderful story that brings Dr. Levine to this concept of the tiger and the trigger, in that he's working with a patient that has been brought to him that is experiencing extreme anxiety. And as the patient comes in for treatment, the patient has this overwhelming anxiety attack, to the point where the person is on the floor, convulsing on the floor. And Dr. Levine is, of course, is in this moment of trying to figure out what to do. He's shocked. He's trying to figure out how to address this patient. It's an emergency situation he was not expecting. And so, in the state of his own kind of panic and trying to figure out what to do, he is kind of caught in this moment where he has this idea that just came to him intuitively, and he just blurted it out, and he said, "There's a tiger in the room. There's a tiger here, and the tiger is chasing you. You need to run." And so, to his shock, the patient starts moving their feet as if they're literally running while they're on the floor, and they're moving their feet. And so he starts to walk them through this scenario where they're escaping the tiger and they go to safety. And he recognizes in this really profound moment the ability of the brain to be able to, and the body, to be able to move through a traumatic event without completely reliving and being in that same event. So he uses the power of imagery to be able to move the patient who had a foundational trauma, and I'm not going to get into all that. They had a foundational trauma in their life, and through starting to work through in this way, they were able to calm themselves in the moment, to move through the triggering moment. And then later he used this technique and built on this technique over many, many years to be able to work with patients and to work to heal patients of their trauma. And so the idea is about not just using the tiger imagery in the moment or that he did, but it was this idea of embracing these triggers, of embracing them in a way that we can use them for our own healing. We don't have to go back into the original trauma, but we can use when we're in the trigger to be able to move through and deal with what's happening in our lives. Now, that is the basic concept of the art of quantum living. It's a process that I work through with many of us. There was 12 of us that went through this process a number of weeks ago, and we just finished our last coaching session yesterday when we completed this process together. But the idea from the quantum living, the Q process, as we call it, is all about looking at our shadow, looking at the qualities of the shadow belief that is within us, that we carry with us, and that come out in these ways. The shadow, the tiger, right? That comes out in this way when we are faced with, relationships, with anger, with things that don't go our way, the things that cause us emotional distress. And I gave the imagery yesterday, or rather, with people when I did the class about thinking of it when we think of our triggers. Have you ever had a necklace or a chain that you left and maybe was packed away somewhere and it became completely unraveled in all these knots? Have you ever tried to do a chain, a gold chain or a silver chain, and it's all in all of these knots, and there you are trying to pick apart all of these knots in order to have the full chain become unraveled. And maybe through a series of all of these weird kind of moves that you made, one particular one unraveled the whole chain. Our triggers and the way in which they work in our body and mind work in much the same way, because they're attached to what we call neural networks, all of these experiences, these little traumas, these big traumas. And so part of it is about unpacking even one trauma or traumas to be able to then slowly unravel the chain. And so I want us to just think about that it's not necessarily about having something massively traumatic in our life that we need to go to that issue. It's about understanding the way from a both neurological perspective, a brain science perspective, as well as a mystical way that we unravel these pain points in our life to have a better quality of life and to have healing. There's an interesting movie, if y'all remember, called The Life of Pi. And it's a movie that was a book that was turned into a movie about this young boy that gets on a ship. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but he's on a ship with his family, and there is a shipwreck, and he's the only survivor. And through a series of events, he ends up being a survivor on the boat with a tiger. And so, through a number of, like 200 and some days, he's in existence with this tiger on a boat, trying not to be eaten by the tiger. And so that too is this other kind of imagery about how we learn in the movie that the tiger in many ways may just be his own self, the projection of his self, his own fears outside of his self, his own desperation, his own way of he's projecting outside of himself, that he's having to make peace with these feelings, with this issue to survive. He's having to embrace this tiger to be able to stay in faith, to stay in his relationship to spirit, to God, to be able to survive this, which he does. Again, this is another way to think about when we see this imagery, this symbolism. It's about this part in ourselves that is this angered part, this part in ourselves that is this part that we need to embrace to be able to have this healing. There's a wonderful book by Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Buddhist monk, called Taming the Tiger Within. And here we learn He talks about a number of different issues because it's about meditations on transforming difficult emotions. But he talks a lot about anger. And in it, he has his famous quote that I used before in service. And he says, if your house is on fire, the most urgent thing to do is to go back and to try to put out the fire, not to run after the person you believe to be the arsonist. If you run after the person you suspect has burned your house will burn down while you're chasing him or her. This is not the action of the wise person. You must go back and put out the fire. When you are angry, if you continue to interact with, or argue with the other person, if you try to punish him or her, you are acting exactly like the someone who runs after the arsonist while their house goes up in flames. And so the idea is that these tigers in our lives, these triggers in our lives are really for us. They're really this opportunity for us to look at our own lives, to look at our own selves, to look at our own reactions, to see what is causing within us to be able to feel these emotions. So we're embracing the tiger in this moment. We're embracing ourselves in this way to be able to not focus on the person that has caused this trigger, but to focus on ourselves, to come back to ourselves. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, attending to the crying baby. The tiger can be the crying baby that is wanting our attention, wanting us to embrace it, to be able to come to this moment of peace, this moment of calm, this moment of newness. So part of what we're doing in this is embracing ourselves, embracing our triggers, embracing our babies. I study Chinese medicine. I have for years, and I study the ancient art of Qigong, which is a martial arts practice. Some even consider it an ancient dance practice in many ways. But there's one particular move called Embrace the Tiger, Return to the Mountain. And without showing you the movement in this moment, it's really about this Taoist idea that the tiger is seen both as yin and yang. It's hard and soft, light and dark, full and empty, moving and still, ferocious and yet gentle. It's about embracing this aspect of us, embracing all of us, to not demonize these parts of ourselves that are ugly when we get angry or we get depressed or we get sad or we get anxious, because we become looking and become judgmental of ourselves. We become not compassionate with ourselves or compassionate with others if they may become the trigger, if it's an external thing that is happening. We're returning to the mountain because the mountain is majestic. It's seen in many ways as the stillness, the peace, the true strength, our true majesty. So part of this, again, I'm embracing all of these ways of the imagery of the tiger for us to understand that we must embrace that wild part of ourselves, those parts of ourselves that we don't like, those parts of ourselves that need love, those parts of ourselves that need to focus on us, not on the arsonist outside of ourselves, not on that outside, but what it is that we need to do to focus on our very selves, to come to a place of balance and peace and joy, to become that still point in our lives. So I invite everyone today to kind of think about what is triggering you. What is triggering you in your life, in your relationship, with your partners, with your children, in your spiritual community? What is it that is setting you off kilter? Are there patterns of things that consistently kind of frazzle you or create all of this emotional tension for you? And looking at those, and instead of judging them or judging others, really come to this piece of peace. The tigers, my hand in the tiger mouth, right, is about you also stepping into that peace, stepping into that courage of the tiger to be able to face these things in our lives that are causing us distress. So I invite everyone this morning, in this day, to think about that, to ponder that, to open up to spirit and know that there's something good for you here in all of this, knowing that there's some way in which spirit is calling you in this very moment to look at what is outside that is scary for you, that is fearful for you, that is causing you pain, whether it's someone that you think is out there causing you pain, to be able to come back to yourself, to come back to that Christ spirit, that Christ center, that Christ consciousness, to be able to move forward in your lives and have a better quality of living, loving, and being. And so there you have it. Thank you, all of you. I love you so much. And so now it's time to roar. Peace be with you all on this good and gracious journey.